When you check out at the pharmacy, you see the journey from idea to medicine, thanks to our intellectual property system, or IP for short. IP safeguards inventions, like a new way to prevent seizures or lower cholesterol. And IP supports competition from other brands, then lower cost generics, which are 90% of prescriptions filled in the US. Innovation, competition, lower costs, thanks to IP. Learn more at phrma.org/IP works wonders.
Hey babies, hey babies, hey babies, hey babies. Hi everyone, hi everyone, hi everyone. Happy Wednesday. No Callow today and a short show today, short podcast today if you're listening to it that way. No YouTube today. On the radio, ESPN 630 today, Virginia starts their play early, noon tip in the ACC tournament. So you're going to hear that today on the radio, and therefore we're just doing a short single segment, and then we'll see what happens tomorrow. Could be the same thing if UVA were to win today. Anyway, that's why you'll get just a 25-minute show, which today includes a conversation I just had yesterday with the voice of the Houston Texans, Marc Vandermeer, to talk about how in the world did they decide to give up on Laremy Tunsil or trade him away? What's the reasoning behind that? And if there really are any things we should be thinking about with him, teams don't typically trade away Pro Bowl left tackles who still have a lot left in the tank. And you'll hear his reasoning, and I'll get to that in a moment. But let's just kind of do first the news of the latest with the Commanders. So the first player that seemingly kind of got away from them in free agency was Jeremy Chinn. I know there was interest, at least I thought, on both sides at the end of the season. I mean, we spoke to Jeremy towards the end of the year, and you got the sense that he was kind of part of the family and that he wasn't going to go. And he was a player who took a one-year show-me deal. He reportedly, I never asked him this personally, but he reportedly had stated that he was offered more money on a one-year deal to go other places, but chose to come here and play for Quinn and Witt, and it really worked out. He had a terrific season for them. Is he a perfect player? No, he's not a perfect player. In coverage against specifically, high-level tight ends, there was a problem there. But he played with the physicality that they like. He had the position flex that they like, kind of looked like a big linebacker. He had the type of menacing personality traits on the field where he could kind of impose himself on a game. And I thought that for sure that he was a keeper and he was someone they were going to bring back. And, as we were creeping closer to the start of free agency, they signed John Bates, they signed Zach Ertz, they signed Bobby Wagner, they ended up signing Tress Way. I was a little bit surprised that that deal didn't get done. That was one of them that if there was going to be, a multi-year commitment to somebody, that I thought it would be him. And then all of a sudden, the safety market, which boomed a few years ago and then really kind of topped out with Xavier McKinney a year ago, kind of has flattened back out. We saw what happened with Cam Curl. And so I think there was a let's test the market, let's find out. There are viable options at that position that are out there, but it is not him. And unless you're going to spend for Javon Holland, convince him to come here and take a big contract, which I can't imagine this team was looking at spending a lot of money on, knowing they were going to have to get help on the offensive line, knowing they need an edge rusher, and knowing that, some of this stuff is premium position stuff, knowing they need another receiver. I didn't see safety as a place where they were going to spend a ton of money. So I thought Chinn would come back. And I was surprised a little bit when he ended up signing with Las Vegas. But once he got to free agency and I started to kind of look around at the list of players and I went, all right, I guess if he walks and he walks at a number that they don't like, there are viable, replacements for him. The question is, will you get the same impact that he had? He really grew in the locker room. Jeremy was actually a pretty, at least what we saw, and he spoke to us a lot. He was a pretty reserved, quiet guy. His personality on the field didn't really match what we saw in the locker room. It was like the light switch went on and he became Jeremy Chinn. I'm going to, break your face when you get on the field. And when he's off the field, he's actually very quiet, reserved, very soft spoken. And I remember hearing from the coaches that things had kind of changed for him in the middle of the year. He found his voice in the locker room. And that's another reason why I thought he really found himself here. He'd really kind of turned his career back around. He had a lot of injuries in Carolina the last couple of years. And he really kind of found himself. And I thought he was going to come back. And I was very surprised when it ended up he went a different direction. Maybe they just didn't offer him the money. When you if you're a player of his caliber where he clearly has a future to play, when you do agree to the 1-year show me deal, like what Joey Bosa just did with the Bills, typically if you do the show me part of it, on the other side, you're unwilling to take less money to continue playing. And maybe, and I don't know this for a fact, but maybe the Commanders just offered him less money, and that's all it is. And he took the deal with the Raiders because he was offered less money. And I wish him a lot of luck. I really enjoyed, watching him play. Again, I didn't think he was a perfect player for them. I thought there were some coverage liabilities with him, but there are very few perfect players out there. And I thought he kind of fit what was going on here. So yesterday, there's a hole. There's, John Allen's release and Jeremy Chinn's departure were the first two holes that were added to the upgrades that you hope are going to happen to the roster. And, they quickly addressed both of them. By releasing John, they went and got Javon Kinlaw. I know there's a lot of people have a lot to say about the amount of money that he got. I'm going to talk about that after you hear from Marc Vandermeer. But in Chinn's case, I think this was, I don't know if a surprise is the right word because it did get to free agency, but this was one that was kind of a self-made issue. By letting him go, they had to replace him, and they did it yesterday by signing Will Harris. Will Harris has experience with Lance Newmark. He had played the position in multiple different, not unlike Chinn, he moves around a little bit on the back end, obviously, in Detroit for a number of years, and then he played a season in New Orleans. We got to see him at the end of the season. Obviously, he's a former teammate of Marshawn Lattimore. So the only real question here is, and they got him at a very good price. So from a cap perspective, they kept the minimal outlay on the cap low with him. The question, the way that you can ask, and I think it's a fair question about Kinlaw, are you going to get the same production out of these players? Yes, you saved some money, and I'll get to Kinlaw in a minute because I know that's the thing that people are saying about him, that they didn't save a lot of money. Yes, you saved a lot of money, at least on the cap, and moving forward over John Allen and a little bit over Jeremy Chinn. Turns out to be, a less amount of deal. But are you going to get the same production? And here is a team that on that side of the ball at this point, after the Tunsil deal, appears to me really in need of what are we going to do about the run defense more than anything to try to fortify and hopefully fix that or get a better result. And I think that starts with a better edge setter. But when you lose people like John Allen, who is a very good player, you replace him with someone who's either been injured or erratic and non-productive at times. And I'll hear out you just haven't seen the best of him. This former first-round pick is going to outperform this contract. I'll hear all that stuff out with him, and I'm an optimist, so I'm willing to believe all of that. But until I see it, it's hard to know. I know what I got with John. He was a very consistent player. He wasn't a dominant player like he was a few years ago, but he was a very consistent player. When you remove him off the roster, who are you replacing him with? And the player they're replacing him with has a humongous upside, and I'll buy you haven't seen the best of him. But until you do see the best of him, it hasn't happened yet. The results speak for themselves, and Allen's results speak for themselves, and Kinlaw's due to this point too. When you lose Chinn, I'll go back to I didn't think he was the Pro Bowl safety of the NFC. I didn't think he was the best at his position, but he fit very well on this team. He played with the style that they liked. He became someone that was really respected in the locker room, who was kind of part of the family and part of the chemistry that was built. And as far as run defense goes, I think in general, he was a pretty good supporter of that. You replace him. Is Will Harris going to be equally as good? He does also play with a very physical style. He is a movable part, maybe not as big as Jeremy Chinn. They do have some young players like Tyler Owens. Let's see what happens with him in camp. Does he continue to develop to be beyond? Because they got what they think was a find in him, and he made the team mainly as a special teamer. But did they find somebody who could grow into that position? We didn't see very much of Dominique Hampton a year ago, the 5th-round pick out of Washington, who had kind of transitioned over more to a linebacker position because, again, he's kind of like a tweener, maybe a little too big and maybe not quite fast enough to play the safety position on the back end, maybe not quite big enough to be a sturdy linebacker. I think that they're going to need to find a spot for him. So they have some options with young players at the position. But are they going to, assuming they signed Will Harris because he's basically plugged in potentially as the starter back there, did they get somebody that is going to give you the same production that Chinn did? And that's a risk. So here's a defense that I think we can all agree needed to improve, specifically in the run defense. They made a choice about John Allen. They replaced him with Javon Kinlaw. There's an upside question here and a savings on the cap question here. And you weigh that, but still in the end, you have to perform better to validate the move. And then Will Harris ends up replacing Jeremy Chin, who might be a player that just kind of got away from them. Are you going to get similar to same production? I'll buy that. But if it's just that or a drop off of any form, then you're still trying to climb uphill to get your defense to the place you want it to be. So there's been, I would say, to the start on the offensive side of the ball, I think it was a hit what they did, what they've done so far. Debo, Laremy Tunsil specifically. What a massive upgrade on that side of the ball. We talk about all of that throughout the week. But on the defensive side of the ball, where improvement needs to occur as well, they either replaced players with what they hope is production, and they risked getting less production on a side of the ball that needs to improve. So we'll see what happens. All right, let me focus back in on the Laremy Tunsil deal, which was earth-shattering around the league and obviously huge for this team, and the trickle-down effect on the offensive line is massive. So I got to catch up with the voice of the Texans, Marc Vandermeer, and I wanted to ask him, one, why are the Texans doing this, trading away a Pro Bowl tackle? And here's what he had to say.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality bikes, which might lead to another discovery. Getting back in the saddle isn't always comfortable. Good news is Sierra has massage guns. And chafe wipes, too. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase of 16 weeks, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
Let's welcome in the play-by-play voice of the Houston Texans, Marc Vandermeer. Marc, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Bram, always a pleasure. Very busy time. Lots of excitement, though.
Yes, and we had one, at least here, that felt really out of the blue in acquiring Laremy Tunsil from the Texans. Were you surprised yesterday when you heard that the Texans had traded him?
I was surprised at the timing of it, I guess, but I wasn't totally surprised because I know that they have big bills coming due here, Bram. I mean, they have Derek Stingley Jr. this offseason. Next year, you have C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. already, and they were picked second and third in the draft. You can imagine how that's going to go contractually because they've been terrific for this team. And, Laramy's been terrific for this team in his 6 years. But, you can't pay everybody. You can't have everybody. And I think also they want to revamp things on the offensive line in general. They already released Shaq Mason. They have a lot of other work to do, clearly. So I wasn't totally surprised. I'm glad they got what they got. We'll see what Nick Caserio does with it.
Okay. There is an argument, though, like even in revamping an offensive liner, why would you take away a Pro Bowl left tackle from that quarterback? Can you kind of address that idea that how do they get better by removing one of the best tackles in the NFL?
Well, I don't think they do it with, let's just trade Laremy and see what happens.
Yeah.
I think there's a plan here. And even in the building, I don't know if you would move Blake Fisher, who they drafted last year out of Notre Dame, to left tackle, but I guess that is a possibility. Titus Howard has done it in his life. He's also played right tackle a ton and guard last year right next to Laremy. So Titus is an option, but maybe they go another direction. Maybe they work draft magic and draft somebody relatively high and start over at that position so you're paying somebody on a rookie contract. As we all know, Bram, great players can come from anywhere in the draft, and sometimes they materialize through free agency. Guys rise to the occasion. So you're right. You have a great left tackle there, but I think that with Cole Popovich, the offensive line coach, And with Nick Caley, the new offensive coordinator, they want a mentality up front that's going to be blocking for run game performance and add in the passing game as well. Everybody knows about their pass protection issues last year, but they need to run the ball better so it doesn't become as much of an issue, whether it's Laremy or anybody else at left tackle.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about the player that Washington's getting just for a moment. So anytime a deal like this is made, like we're celebrating it because this is something that Washington needed badly. It's a unit that needed an upgrade from where they are. This feels like a massive upgrade. But when a team is willing to trade someone of that caliber, there is a red flag. So is there any red flag we should be thinking about with Laremy Tunsil at this stage of his career?
Well, I think that pass protection-wise, you're looking at one of the best guys in the league, right? Everybody knows about the false starts, and they were an issue. You know, I'll say this about false starts, and he had a bunch of them last year. He cleaned it up as the year went along, but they were often at, is there ever a good time for one? Right. But often at really critical times. And, you know, and I get it, O-linemen try to get a jump because they got a ferocious fire-breathing dragon across from them they're trying to prevent from getting to the quarterback. I think, you know, he's getting a little older, but the performance pass protection-wise still seems to be there. And I'm not going to blame the lack of a run game. Now, Joe Mixon had a nice year, don't get me wrong. But overall as a team, think 49ers when they were playing really well on offense. That's what this team kind of wanted to do, and they weren't able to do it. I think Nick Caley is going to run the ball a little bit differently, more downhill style. And I don't know, you know, Laremy can do anything probably. But I just think they felt like across the board, you know, all boats will rise with the tide with this subtraction and the ability to do more with the other four spots.
Okay. And for Washington, they are in the situation where we have this second-year all-star rookie quarterback, and they needed to help and protect him. So that's why they make this deal. I also want to talk to you about one other thing, which I thought was an interesting comparison that we had this year to your team from a year ago, which CJ Stroud had this amazing rookie season. There was this idea that they could kind of go all in. They got Stephon Diggs. You guys made a couple of very prominent moves in the offseason, and there was a lot of hype and hope that there would be a jump from year one to year two, and the team was back in the playoffs again. And we have a similar thing going on here where we had an outstanding rookie quarterback who had this unbelievable rookie season. Team went a lot farther than I think people thought it would this year, and all of a sudden they're making additions like this with the hope of doing that. Could you kind of take us through what at this point in time last year felt like for Houston and what was important to them as they headed into this the second season with CJ Stroud?
Well, I think the expectation level from the fan base was incredibly high, and the moves they made, because a year ago we're talking about acquiring Danielle Hunter and then Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs. They had a very sexy offseason acquisition-wise, and the thought was, well, you went to the divisional round. Naturally now you should go to the AFC Championship game and beyond. And I'm sure the Washington fans are thinking, hey, Super Bowl, right? We're going to get there this year. That is easier said than done. We all know, Bram, how hard it is to get to the divisional round, to be fortunate enough and good enough to be in those key games when you're in the final 8 of this league. And it's brutal. You have like a bad series or two and it's over. And it just feels awful. But that's what, look at Buffalo. Look at all these teams, Detroit, trying to get there. And it's so hard to get there. So with Stroud, and I think with Jaden Daniels too, you know, a lot of expectations. There are people whose livelihoods depend on spending the offseason designing ways to get to you, designing ways to make your life miserable. And Stroud had to deal with that last year. And with the pass protection issues they had, he took a lot of hits, and I think it affected him for a while. I really felt he woke up in the playoffs. The game against the Chargers, he really came alive. Now, when I say woke up, I think he still had a decent year. He's the starting quarterback on a 10-win team that won the division comfortably. And I think Stroud is only going to go up from here. But look, you're in it now with a franchise quarterback. You're going to have some years better than others. You're going to have, you know, the bumps and bruises and the rocky road of getting to the playoffs and achieving in the playoffs. And, you know, like I said, a bad day can ruin it all. But you know this, the joy is in the journey.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's all about week 1. Did we win? Week 2, let's go from here. Because if you get too hung up on it's Super Bowl or bust, you're going to be miserable.
Mark, how did CJ Stroud characterize his second season? What did he say about it after when it was over?
he always took it upon himself. Hey, I got to get better. I got to play better. I can't, be taking hits. I can't be taking sacks. I have to get rid of the football. It was all about him. He would never hang his teammates out to dry. But I think there were times when he could have. There were times when guys missed blocks. There were times when, hey, a running play wasn't executed, and now you're in second down and 11 or 12, and because they didn't run block well enough or whatever. So there was a lot that went into it. And a quarterback can't always bail you out of trouble. Now, it can really help, and he's really good, but it up front was a lot tougher. And that's why Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, was shown the door. The offensive line coach basically retired Chris Strasser, but they want to get really nasty up front. See, this team is built in the image of DeMeco Ryans on defense, and they play like it. They were playoff ready and maybe Super Bowl ready toward the end of the year. But offensively, they weren't that, and they want to play with that mentality on that side of the ball, and that's why they made these changes.
All right, hey, listen, maybe one of these days we face each other in the Super Bowl. That'd be fun. But
let's do it.
Let's do it. I'll see you there. Mark, thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
Bram, always a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.
All right, so that was Marc Vandermeer, play-by-play voice of the Houston Texans. And then as you saw, as the day played out, and you heard Mark actually reference all of this. I mean, I had heard others like NFL Network and those when I was watching coverage of the free agency moves throughout the day. They were describing that room as toxic. And, Mark, like me, as a voice of a team, he's not going to go that far and use verbiage like that, but he basically insinuated the offensive line just did not play very well. The offensive line was the problem with their offense. Joe Mixon had a nice year for them after coming over from Cincinnati. Stephon Diggs unfortunately got hurt. They had a lot of injuries at wide receiver, but C.J. Stroud was running for his life, and some of that was on him, but the offensive line just did not hold up its end of the bargain. And while they're playing a certain style on defense, they need to get a certain style going on offense. So they just decided to totally reboot. Let me go back to Javon Kinlaw, which I referenced earlier, and I wanted to talk about just for a moment what his contractual situation looks like, because I think one of the big complaints and chief complaints, and I will hear out actually the biggest risk in this is, okay, so you let John Allen go, and we understand why. His contract was coming up. He had one more year. He was making more than what the market would dictate. It leaves you with a couple of options here. And of course, John, at this stage in his career, and any player is going to want some security of they don't want to just play out a year and see what happens at the end of it. So this is the time to talk to them and decide, what do you want to do? And if they were to extend him, it would be probably at a pay cut that he was at. The same time, was it time off of an injury-riddled season to just kind of say, hey, you have a fresh start, we'll get a fresh start. But I talked about this a lot. You can't just move away from people and say, when you don't have their replacement. Like last year when he got hurt, and I heard a lot of fans say well, he wasn't producing that much. And I'm like, they don't have his replacement. They're not better without him. He's a very good player. He might not be the dominant player he was a couple of years ago, but he's a very good player. And they don't have his replacement. And so in this decision, and letting him go, they did create a hole here that they had to fill. And of course, they went out and the first thing they did was get Javon Kinlaw, former first-round pick. Adam Peters knows him. First few years of his career, injury-riddled, missed a lot of time. He's a first-round pick. He's a freakish athlete. He's 6'4", 320, can really move. So you're going to be impressed by the size and the upside, and they're going to sell that he's going to outperform this contract. And hopefully they're right about that, because the deal is 3 years, $45 million, $30 million total guaranteed, 18.5 in cash. The first 2 years, $31 million. So nearly, almost 16 a year in years 1 and 2. Cap hits year 1 and 2, 7.5 million, 2026. 18.4 is the big jump, and they're kind of stuck with that if you see how it's played out. But this really is just a 2-year deal. The dead cap on them in year 3 would be about $5 million, and there'd be a massive savings if they were to move away from it. So this is a 2-year risk that they're taking with Kinlaw. It's not really a 3-year deal. It can be, and if we get to the 3rd year and he's performing really well and he outperforms the contract, they'll just, because he won't even be 30 at that point, they will at that point extend him out. And if he's not, he will be a cap cut. So this is really a 2-year deal for them. There's not much of a risk this year. His cap hit is $7.5 million. It's next year where at $18.4 million and a pretty high dead cap that you have to work something out with him. Deron Payne's contract's going to come up next year as well. They're going to have to make a choice with him. So this is a big year for Kinlaw, and I really feel like it's kind of like a last chance for him to kind of get his career back on track. Those numbers too, and I just want to point this out, like, is it a little higher in thinking about it? Is it a little higher than probably what he could have gotten from some other teams? Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's the truth. Did they overpay a little bit? Yeah, maybe. Is this anywhere near what the high-level defensive tackles make? No. John's number was in the 20s. I know his base salary was below that, but that's what he was kind of slated to make in the $20 to $25 million range this year. Milton Williams on the open market got $26 million per year annual average value from New England. Osa Odigizua got over $20 million from Dallas to re-sign. I think Williams had a tremendous year for Philadelphia, and I think Odigizua had a really, really good year for Dallas. But I don't look at either one of them and go, well, that's Jalen Carter or that's like a premier defensive tackle. Now, maybe they'll turn into those players, and that's what I think the hope is around the league when you sign guys like this. And we live this for years and years and years. So if you look at it from that perspective and you look over the first couple of years that it's about $15 million for Kinlaw, that is way below, like 25 to 40% below, maybe not that high, 25 to about 30 to 35% below what those top tier free agent numbers were. That sounds actually to me about right. Maybe a touch higher than it should be. And maybe it's, maybe they're giving him a premium to make sure that he came here because they believe in him. And again, they're going to sell to you that he either wasn't utilized right or he's finally healthy now, or we know him. You got to trust us on this. And, we're going to figure out a way to get him to outperform the contract. And if they do, then they'll prove everybody right. He'll prove everybody right. They'll prove themselves right with making this deal. But the numbers on its face don't seem that far off from where he probably should be, and they are far below what market value is for what is perceived as top tier, best available defensive tackles. So the number part of it didn't bother me as much. And if you really go through the contract, it's really a 2-year deal. So if this doesn't go well, they'll be, like with almost everything else they've done, they'll be out of it very quickly. Hopefully that's not the case. I want to be an optimist, and I hope things really work out. All right, that'll do it for today. Tomorrow, Bram wants to show ESPN 630 Sports Capital.